Well, welcome back to another episode. This time on the Miles Driven, we're doing the BMW 3 Series, and there are two quick bits of housekeeping I need to do before we get into the generations video. The first is BMWs of this generation across the 3 Series will have different production dates depending on where you are in the world. Okay, so I'll give production dates and I'll give model years, but for some of you, there may be a year or two going either way, especially if you're in places like South Africa and the USA, because production is going to shift over to those countries, and South Africa, then it'll come away, and then it becomes a sort of world car. It's built in parts of Asia as well as the US as well as Europe. So because of that, I'm going to give the generalized sort of longest dates that you can for production from start to finish. It may not be what you've got in your market, but it won't be hugely different. The second thing is the dog is joining with me in the studio today. So if you hear some sort of panting around or something like that, it's not me getting excited about the 3 Series. It's him in the corner under his blanket. Okay, so we're going to start off with the E21. In this generation, we have the inception of the 3 Series model. The Hofmeister kink is brought into the design of the 3 Series, and it has been a mainstay of 3 Series cars. However, very recently, with the 4 Series Coupe, the Hofmeister kink was removed. That was on the latest model. Now, that is 4 Series, not the 3 Series. However, as many of you will know, the 4 Series is the 3 Series Coupe of many generations. So an interesting aspect of the design, but the G80, the 3 Series model, did keep it. So just an interesting aspect of the design of this model. However, let's jump into it. So there's two engines, essentially. There's an M10 and an M20. That's all you get on the first generation. And you have a 315, 316, 318, 320, and 323. There is also our Pigna 2.3 on this generation. The interesting for me is the 315, which is the base model, comes out very late on. And because of that, it's actually quite a sought-after model. If you have a 315, a 316, a 318, and in some markets a 320, although the 320 is the distinguishing car, you will have single headlights, especially in Europe. If you're in the US, that doesn't count. They had to put in 2 headlights either side due to regulations. And in some markets, they had to put square headlights. Very, very rare to find these cars with square headlights, but due to regulations, some markets got those. In the aftermarket now, some people like 4 headlights, and so they bring in either an aftermarket grille or cut the grille, and you can get HELA conversions. You can tell if a car has had a HELA conversion because the interior lights will be slightly smaller lamps than the exterior. If it's an original conversion, then they've had to find one, take the grille and the inner lights, and they'll be the same size. On the E21, there isn't a lot I'm going to say. These are classic cars. If they've survived this long, they've probably been one of the better ones. What I will say is that the highest power one, 2.3, and the smallest one, I think that's the 315, sort of split the difference in appeal. The 320 has a 6-cylinder model. It also has a 4-cylinder model. Depends a little bit on production year and where you are in the world. The 6 cylinders, generally speaking, people really like the 6 cylinders, but again, this is something about the world. Some people like the 4 cylinders, and it depends really what was predominant in the market as to what will be around. And the last two things I will say about this generation, you have carburetor and fuel injected. People prefer the fuel injected model, and if you can go for the 320 with fuel injection, that's one of the sweet spots. However, the one that most people look for is the 323i. It's a fuel injected engine, highest power. It's the one, if you like, that starts off the idea of having a saloon, but a sporty vehicle. You have to remember, before this, that distinction doesn't really exist. Cars are still becoming what we know them to be today. And to have a car that could be a family sedan vehicle, but also something that a parent or a grandparent or someone who just wanted a large vehicle could actually go out and enjoy as if they had a sports car, the 3 Series was a manufacturer bringing that onto the market, those two desires, and sort of finding a performance sedan vehicle. So that is the E21. Let's move on to the E30. And there is a ton to talk about in the E30, but I realised I didn't actually, after giving you the proviso about production dates, I didn't mention them for the E21. So it's 1975 to 1983. This model, I've had to put a pin on the side here, it is 1982 to 1994. And there's a 2-year drop off on the end point there. Some countries only go to 1992. Some get them later than 1982. So let's say I was going to do every single to the territory, and I realized it would be way too difficult. The interesting thing about this vehicle, first generation, it's built in West Germany. At the time it is West Germany. Now it's just Germany. This vehicle is built in South Africa and West Germany, and we get the M3 version of the car. In fact, there's an M3 and an M3 Evo and M3 Evo 2. So the E30 really sort of starts up the idea that this can be a proper performance vehicle whilst also being a sedan. And whilst doing all of that, it brings a 2.4 diesel engine. So that's the 325D. It's quite incredible how many things actually happen on this generation, because there is also an X-Drive model, as we would know today, an all-wheel drive model, and that has to have a huge number of modifications done to it to make the suspension work with the chassis. And so if you find an X model, it is actually quite different underneath than the rear-wheel drive models. So it isn't just sort of stick a front drivetrain in, put something that will differential at the front and get the front wheelies to either operate all the time or some of the time. It was quite complex, and fair play to BMW for doing it, because at the time, if we think where we are, engineering is very mechanical at the point. The idea that these cars have to go out, they had to perform, they had to last long enough that BMW keep their name as this sort of performance but somewhat luxury vehicle, somewhat desirable car. And if they were breaking down every 10 minutes, that just wasn't going to happen. So fair play to BMW for taking all the risks on this generation, because to go from diesel, all-wheel drive, and a performance M3 all in one generation, that's a lot going on. It makes one job quite difficult, but I will say there's a 316, there's a 316S, 318, 320, 323, there's 324D, as I've just mentioned, and then the 325 models. Now, the 325 models are the most desirable, aside from the M3, of course. There is a 325i. That's the one that was widely praised for having great chassis balance, drives really smoothly, the engine's fantastic. I've driven one of these cars, and despite them being a little bit tight if you're very, very tall, they have something about them that will make you remember them. On the other side of the coin, though, you have the X model on the 325, and that is a highly desirable vehicle today because it brings in, as I was explaining just earlier, this idea you can have all-wheel drive, so you can have all-year performance. You can have a performance car, you get the sweet spot of the engines, and you have a fairly balanced chassis to go with the all-wheel drive without a ton of weight gain. So there was a lot going on for BMW in the E30 generation. Now, I'll give the diesel a mention in that it probably isn't the one that most people want to get today. However, for those people that really like diesel engineering and sort of diesel ethos that has gone from that time, I know it's unpopular in mainstream today, but for a lot of people, diesel technology is just so interesting, and there are shows around the world committed just to diesels, okay? This early 324D would be the one to get. The problem you're going to find, they were used cars. They were the ones that people bought if they had to cover mileage, if the company vehicle was, they said they had to have a diesel for some reason, if there was an emissions consideration at the time because they were seen as a bit cleaner due to CO2. We won't get into all of that, but the point here is that most of those were workhorse vehicles, and if you find one, it's either going to have been a real diesel enthusiast that has kept it in perfect condition, and they're going to want quite a bit of money for it because they've probably got the only one, or it's going to be fairly ratty and it's going to need a lot of work. And we're talking about the sort of work where you could go and buy yourself a nice 325i and enjoy it for similar money. So it's difficult. But if you find one, if you're really into your diesels, you'd have something fairly special. Now, throughout this video, I'm going to just touch on the M3 models because the M3s are special in their own right. They probably deserve their own video throughout the generations. What I'll say on the E30 is that it is widely seen for most car journalists, car enthusiasts, as a real changing moment within the car world. Okay, it brings something extra. And ever since then, BMW have been sort of held against this post of, is it as good as an M3 E30 model, M3 E30 Evo model? And that's kind of unfair because regulations have changed so heavily for them. They just couldn't produce one, and the market has moved on quite a lot. But that is the car, and if you want one, you're going to pay for it. So just be willing to, put your savings into that car. And don't be very careful of this idea of investing in this car. Yes, it's desirable today. Yes, everyone knows it's a fantastic drive. Will people in 20, 30 years still appreciate it? I don't know. I can't tell you they will. Technology is changing cars so quickly that it really is purists that love this E30. Whether those purists will just age out over time and in 30 years people will just want to talk about electric stuff, who knows? You and I probably won't be, but some people may be. That's the E30 generation. Let's jump on to the E36. And it's 1990 for some of you, up to about 2000. For some of you, it only goes to 1997. Okay, so there's a real broad difference in the E36 model, and that's really because the E46 is coming in the sort of mid to late 90s. Some markets, it's really important to get the E46 out. Others, the E36 serves its purpose. But I do need to make a quick mention on the E30. I forgot to say how special the 318 is to drive. The 318 has a very zippy 4-cylinder engine. No, it's not as powerful as an M3. No, it's not as smooth and as torquey as the 325. But if you want something you can zip along a back road, the 318 on the E30 is the one. So I forgot to add that in on the last generation. So I'll do it now. E36 then. So on this one, production shifts to really across the world. You've got Russia, you've got Asia, you've got USA, and you've got Germany producing the E36. It is built widely across the world. It expands the market for the vehicle. And this really is where the 3 Series becomes as close to, you can say, a mass market vehicle. It's difficult whenever I say that for what is considered a sort of performance or luxury vehicle to say it becomes mass market, because at the end of the day, it's not what would be recognized, a Volkswagen Golf. Yeah, Volkswagen Golf, you can say that's a mass market vehicle, or a Toyota Corolla, because it's sold around the world in huge numbers. But for this segment of car, this is where the 3 Series really becomes a mass car. There are a few aspects to the E36 that really step the game forward that get a little bit lost, I think, when comparing it to the previous generations. The first is the Z-link rear axle suspension. That makes a big difference to the way these cars drive. It makes a huge difference to handling. And for people that know the E36 and love the E36, it's a big deal. People that are not so interested in this generation, they kind of just move past it because, of course, it carries forward onto later generations of this Model 2. But this is its inception point. And from there, let's run through the engine. I hope I get all these right. I've had to store them in my head. If I miss one, sorry. 316, 318, 320, 323, 325, 328, 318 TDS, 325 TDS, M3. No 330 on this model. The M3 on this model as well. If you're in the US, it's not the car that it is in Europe. Let's just leave it at that for the M3. As I say, really, M3s need their own video. But that's kind of widely known anyway. Among the sort of regular models, there's a desirability that really goes from 318. Okay, 318 gets a 1.9 in its later years. So if you want a 4-cylinder, 318 with a 1.9, that has quite a lot of attention around it. Everything from a 320 onwards is a 6-cylinder. Because of the 6-cylinder, most people will just say, look, the 328 is obviously, it's the one of the 3 Series models. It's where power gets pushed up. It's where sort of true driver's cars, especially in the coupe version, people generally see that as everything, shy of an M3, that's the one that's the performance car of its time. Don't overlook the 325 TDS. That was actually the first sort of diesel performance sedan, really. Other manufacturers had diesel cars, but BMW were trying to say, but ours is something you can actually go and enjoy. And okay, it's not the E46 generation where they really take that motto and run with it, but it is fairly true. And I got to drive both the 36 with the TDS, with the 325 TDS, and 325, driven a 328. I've driven one of the 4 cylinders. I couldn't remember exactly which one. And I would say, I don't actually class 4 cylinders. People are a bit sniffy about 4 cylinders on BMWs for whatever reason. Now, obviously, things have changed, but on these older cars, people always go, no, you want the 6-cylinder. There is some enjoyment to be had from the 4 cylinders that you can't get from the 6 cylinders, and that's because you've got to be working all the time. And that today, when we live in a world of 2000 RPM torque and off you go, it's something a little bit unique. But I'm not going to argue against 328i. That's the one for many of you that you should buy if you want something today that is classic, worth putting a load of money into to make it nice, because ultimately it's the one people like. Is it going to be worth loads in the future? I don't know. But what I can say is that generally when you speak to people that know 36, if you're not talking about the M3, a lot of them start talking about the 325i and the 328i. Let's move on to the one that many of you have probably been waiting for, the E46. And this runs officially from 2000 to 2006. However, I will note that for most of you, or for some of you, it will be from 1997. It's that early for some markets. 97 to 2006, that's the total of the E46. And I don't know quite where to start, to be honest, on the E46. It was one of the most heavily developed vehicles ever at the time. It was 2 million kilometers of testing that was done to create the E46. There is an M3, there's an M3 CS, there's an M3 CSL. This is why the M3 kind of needs its own video over here. I can say I've driven an M3, got a very short drive once in a CSL when it was fairly new, probably only 3-4 years old. It came in trade, got to drive it, but short distance. So I couldn't really tell you a lot about the car. Driven M3s though on this generation quite a bit. Never driven a CS, interestingly. Let's put them all off to the side because there's too much to talk about in the E46. One of the things I will say, there is a ZHP package for some of you. Others will have models known as the Club Sports. And there is essentially today we have the M Lights. So you have, the regular 3 Series, then you have the M340D and the M340i, same for the 2 Series and for the 5 Series, etc. And then you have the full M, the M3, the M4, the M5. At this time, this sort of ZHP or Club Sport, that kind of was that M Light car of the time. Now, if you're in Europe, you would have most likely got a Club Sport model. These have a small spoiler on the back that is lifted, so it's a different design to the regular M Sport. Have a front chin spoiler, and pre-facelift, a lot of them come in a automatic. You can find them in manual. Facelift, there's a little bit more of a mixed market. Just depends where you are. Quite desirable. Lots of people store them away, or they be a future classic. They certainly, when you go to car shows, you do catch them. I don't really see them on the road anymore. I remember when I sold them, just trying to think, maybe it sold 1 or 2. I don't want to make it seem like there were loads of them around, but people didn't really appreciate them. I have to say, when they were, say, 4 or 5 year old vehicles, just didn't get a lot of appreciation. But then after a few years, people started to realise they're quite special. And possibly that's not so true with the ZHP. I think the ZHP cars generally were always seen as quite special. However, I'm talking about performance petrol vehicles. And really, what the 3 Series E46 generation did was made diesel just appear everywhere. It became ubiquitous across Europe to have 3 Series diesels parked everywhere. In the UK at one point, the 3 Series became the best in-segment vehicle selling car, higher than the Ford Mondeo at the time. There's a Top Gear segment on that. But just to sort of show how much improvement they did with that diesel engine, yes, there was tax laws at the time, especially in Europe, that really pushed it. It made it financially advantageous to go for diesel, but people wouldn't have got a diesel model if it didn't bring the performance that it promised of a BMW badge, and it had it. And I have to say kudos to BMW, because so many manufacturers had tried before this point to bring diesel to the masses, and really the only successful ones were either very large diesels for luxury vehicles in Europe, or your sort of large 4x4s at the time, Range Rovers, Toyota Land Cruisers. They had brought diesels over, Land Rover Discovery as well, and that had come into the market and people had accepted them. But in a sporty sedan, the E36 sort of started that wave, and the E46 just turns it over. So, in this generation, we'll come on to the diesels in a minute. Let's just do the petrols. 316 for some of you, 318, 320, 323, 325, 328, 330. And within there, you have some IS models. There is quite a lot of variation. And depending on where you are watching this in the world, there will be sub-variants. There is a model, I can't remember its variation. I'll have to put something on the screen. But there was a model for the US which was a low emissions model, which just sold, I think, in about 3 or 4 states. Interesting vehicle. There was models that were just for Europe. There were diesel performance E-type models. And then there was a compact, which wasn't sold everywhere, but at the time was something quite special for what it was. Well, I did just take a quick break just to look up. It's called the SULEV. That's the 325 SULEV. That's the one that the US gets. That's the low emissions car. Had a lot of things brought on it to make it sellable in certain states in the US. I will just add on that ZHP package for the US. There are a raft of changes. It isn't just some cosmetics and sort of bigger wheels. I think that was BMW's sort of attempt to say, look, we understand there is a market of people that can't quite stretch up to the M3, or for whatever reason, they don't want to go up to the M3, but they do want something more from us. And this was the car that they were able to sell. So I believe Canada, you also got the ZHP, but in very short numbers. Can't remember exactly how the numbers worked out between the areas of North America, but I was pretty sure the Canadians got them, but the majority went to the USA. Within the diesels, 320D, it's a 4-cylinder diesel, 330D, 6-cylinder diesel. The 330D, 201, 202 brake horsepower, depending on the exact official measurement of where you are in the world. The interesting thing for me is that it means all cars that are 330 badged have more than 200 horsepower on this generation, and for the most part, they will be something that feels like a performance car. The more interesting aspect, if you're looking for longevity, is that I've seen cars with this 6-cylinder engine that have gone way above 200,000 miles. So there's a few in Europe that have done sort of 500,000 kilometers, so 300,000 miles. This engine is generally considered to be really, really robust, especially in the 3 Series. It also went into the 5 Series. It goes into the X5, and there it's good for its mileage. It's just that it is under a little bit more stress, especially in the X5, because it's a larger vehicle. There's more going on. It's always attached to an all-wheel drive system. And so ultimately, 3 Series ones are the ones that seem to go the longest. But for everyone that wants a 6-cylinder, the 330 generally is the pick. I actually owned, what have I owned? I think I've owned 2 of this series. Yeah, 2 of this series generation. E46 generation 3 Series. The first I had was a 320 Ci. Coupe model, 6-cylinder, 170 horsepower. It was a lovely car. I bought it because I was between, I'd had an Audi S3, wanted something that was less costly because the S3 kept having problems with it, and it was modified, and it was huge power, blah, blah. And I wanted something that was comfortable and could do some long driving, which I had to do. That 320, it had the smooth 6-cylinder engine, wasn't the most powerful. Because of that, though, it's quite a deal on the used market. The 330 Ci, though, that drove, especially today, I feel that one got a lot of love roughly, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. And because of that, they're generally in better shape. So if you're looking on the used market and you're after something that really sort of should still be in pretty good shape and you're willing to spend a bit more money, it's the 330 Ci. For everyone that wants to cover huge mileage, look at those diesels. Let's move on to the E90 generation now. So this is the last 3 Series that will have the coupe model, the convertible model, the estate model, and the sedan or saloon all under the same nameplate as the 3 Series. So the E90, E91, E92, E93. Okay, you don't get a hatchback model like you did on the E46. And there's a huge amount of engineering that went into this car, predominantly to offer it with a 6-cylinder turbocharged engine. Initially, twin turbocharged engine, which then moved to the twin scroll, sort of single turbo setup. That's all in the 335i. There's also a 335d, which was the car for many people, especially if you were in Europe. The 335i was great. It had tunability to it. But for those that wanted to consider fuel economy and have performance, the 335D, was the one to get. Now, there's loads of details in the E90, and there's so many aspects that I could go on for an hour about, but I'm going to try and condense it all down to just pick out the highlights. So this is the generation that gets a V8 engine in the M3. We'll put that off to the side. We'll do it in another video. But just know, it's 8 cylinders. This is a first, this is a last. And I can't really see 8 cylinders ever coming to a 3 Series again. I think holding on to 6 cylinders in later generations would be pretty difficult for BMW, the way that emissions laws and everything else is set up. But there we are. This also brings in a wider number of variations. It's built in a larger number of countries. I think it's about 10 different countries the E93 series gets built in. So that shows you, some of them are knockdown kits that are just sent out across the world and then constructed. Others are full factories. So yeah, just bear that in mind. It also adds in the widest number of variations because of that. So on the petrols alone, 316, 318, 320, and variations within them, 323, 325, 328, 330, 335. In the diesels, there was a 318. There was a 318 on the previous generation. I probably didn't mention only because it was sold in a few markets on facelift cars, was popular really with company cars, but they continued it into this generation. And again, sold pretty well. Starts at 140 horsepower, so not too bad. 320, 325D, 330D, 335D. There are then sort of subcategories within them because at the time BMW were trying to meet lots of different markets. There is a 320 IS model, that's IS SI, so SI model 320 SI. That one even gets a different engine code to sort of differentiate it from the regular 320. So just a point there. In the buyer's guide for the E90, I do give that car a mention as well. And that's something, not everyone gets it. It's quite a special car because it brings through this legacy. All the way back from the E21, there has been a zingy 4-cylinder that you could thrash down a country lane and enjoy. This one sort of really brings it home. Partly, I think BMW knew that after this, everything was going to go turbocharged. They were going to bring more 2-litre engines in, and the legacy was going to have to, for want of a better term, change. So I think the best way to describe it is a little bit of a swan song car. They are special whenever you see them. People do overlook them because they're a 4-cylinder. But if you're not so bothered about having 6-cylinder power, having huge power from the turbocharged 6 cylinders, they're really fun. I've had driven 2 or 3 of them that have either been part exchanges or we were selling back in the day, and they all drove nicely. Really sort of something that you could enjoy. They were not the fastest things on the road, but they just had something about them that I could only say, give them a drive, and you might know what I mean. There is a package that they do, and it goes onto the coupe model, which just really adds on wheels and spoilers and stuff. That's not the same car. Generally, just the saloon model, and it says SI at the end of the badge. So something to like. I made the mistake at the start. You saw me, and so yeah, easily mistaken. Couple of things on the 335i, because of course it's not really too much point in me spending a lot of time trying to say, oh, this one. At the end of the day, for most of you, the 335i is the winner. It has the M54 in this generation, then the M55, but the 06 to 10 models, or 06 to 09 really, that have the M54, that's the one that a lot of people sort of gravitate to. People were pushing these engines. And at the time when they were out, YouTube was very, very early, but people were doing these sort of straight line races of tuned 335 versus an M3, they probably still do it today, and showing what could be taken power-wise, could come out of a 335 engine. It's actually why, very early on, if you buy a very, very early 335i, you can sort of open up the diff fairly easily. BMW changed that early 07, late 06, so that now you really have to cut it open. And that was because if you fitted a limited slip diff to the 335i, added on a few tuning bits, intercooler, downpipe, and remap, that was a formidable car for an M3 to go up against. M3 had a better chassis. Arguably, it had a better engine. Yes, Comros, all these things break, blah, blah, blah. But if we're talking about enjoyment, the M3 is better. But from a power perspective, just no arguing with a 335i, especially if it was in a wagon or something like that. That was the car that many people who wanted something that was an all-car everything went for. If you're in Europe or parts of the world that got the 335D though, that thing's a torque monster. I remember when these sort of coming through, customers would always ask for a 3330D. Okay. I used to sell them sort of 3 years old, something like that. And I'd say, look, do you want to drive a 335D? It's about X amount more. I can't remember exactly how much. And people were like, no, I've got a 330D on the E46. I really just want to stick with that. And, you know, you could sort of tell if people were a bit enthusiastic and you say, look, why don't you have a look? You're here. Let's sort of drive a both. Why not? I quite like going out in them. Every single time I did that, the person bought the 335D, unless there was one time they didn't because the price gap was huge. And the 330D, it got overlooked a little bit, but it was a fantastic car. It's just that the 335D just brought something different to the market. I really don't know at the time a diesel engine that had that amount of impact, aside from the previous generation when it brought in the diesel models. There will be, Audi did a lot with diesel technology, especially later on with large diesel engines. So probably fair to say they were also having a big go of it. So are Mercedes. It's just that that's a pretty special engine, the 335D. I'll leave that E90 series there, and we're going to move on to the F30. In the F30, we switch from hydraulic power steering to electric power steering. This was brought about mainly because of regulations that were forcing the whole industry to go to electric power steering. But a couple of manufacturers really felt it was critical to their brand at the time to make sure that electric power steering didn't dull the driving experience. And BMW, to be fair to them, did a lot of work on it. When they brought in electric power steering, they did it in a way that didn't make some of the compromises that other manufacturers are willing to accept. A few manufacturers did this. Later on, you have Porsche do it, BMW do it. So there's a handful that really said, even if we have to spend more money than we want to, it's so critical to our brand to have the feel for the driver that we're going to spend the additional time, the additional tuning to make sure it still feels like you are connected to the car, even though you don't have that hydraulic sort of pushback. If you've ever driven hydraulic power steering, say an 8046 M3, and as you're going around and you get that feeling of, I am nearing the edge of grip, okay? For most of you, you probably won't care. You're looking at a 320 diesel or something. But it's just an interesting point that BMW went to such an effort. It doesn't matter whether you go for a low-powered 318 or you go all the way up to the M3 on this generation, BMW made an effort for you. And so BMW on this generation, they make my life a little bit easier, but a little bit harder. So this is the generation that brings in active hybrid model. So now you have petrol, diesel, and hybrids. They also go to a big effort to make it so that they know they're going to restrict six-cylinder engines to just the 330 and 340 model, or 335. So 330, 335, 340, depending on year, 335 or 340. But they make an effort with the four-cylinder engine. There's a 328i. That at the time really showed what you could do with a turbocharged four-cylinder engine in this generation of BMW vehicles. It went up against stiff competition. There were other manufacturers that had mastered the four-cylinder, particularly in the Volkswagen Group. The EA888 engine is widely renowned. It's used across the Volkswagen Group. And BMW knew they would have that competition in Audi models. Mercedes were obviously making big strides within their 2-litre that was going into the AMG. So BMW knew they had their work cut out, but they performed. They did it. Fair play to them. The 328i model, N20 engine. There's a lot to be said about engines. You'll notice in the previous generation, I didn't go into the details of the diesel problems with the timing belt. The timing chain braking. I've had 3 friends, and actually, I had one for a very short period of time. I had an E92. So previous generation we're talking about just for a second, had a diesel engine, timing chain was gone, had been replaced and was on its way out again. So that was gone quickly. 3 friends all suffered with timing chain engine problems, all on the diesel engine. The petrols also started to show issues around this time now, 15 years old. And so it's difficult with the 2-litre diesel and the 2-litre petrol on the previous generation. BMW know when they come into this generation, they've got to get it right. Do they get it right? So So basically 2012 is when this car comes in. The first year or two are a little bit difficult for timing chain issues on the diesel. Similar issues are reported on the petrol. Then you get 2000. There is, I don't want to be unfair to this series diesel because the 2-litre diesel gets a late revision in this model. So 2013 and 14 are not too bad. 2015, though, both engines, they get changed. You get the B series engine, and the B series engine is really what you want to go for on this generation if you can. You're going for an N series engine, just bear in mind it needs to have had a good amount of work done to it, and it needs to be a late version. So really that 2014 is the one that you want to look for as a sweet spot if you're on the older engines, okay? I'm avoiding doing too much reliability because if you want to know about reliability of all these cars, there is guides, E46, E90, there is the F30, the G series model is coming up shortly, okay? So there are technical guides you can watch on this channel after this video if you want to know about reliability. I'll cover it lightly, but not too much. In this generation, as I say, in the F30, really it's just the first couple of years. Then we switch on to the B series engines. The B series engines are fairly robust, okay? Which ones would you pick out if you're after performance? Obviously, there's the M3. Let's put that off to the side. M340i. The M340i is the B58 engine. That's all you need to know. B58 engine is renowned across the world now. It's been tuned to 1,000 horsepower from some tuners out there with the Supra and the Z4. The B58 is one of those sturdy engines. It was making more power than BMW ever said at this age. I think they were quoting 330 horsepower. A lot of people just stuck them on rolling roads and were making 370 without a tune. So gives you an idea how prolific at this point the B58 had become, and it was only in its inception into BMW models. So if you want the performance model, M340, that's the one to buy. However, don't overlook that M340D. Don't overlook the 330D. If you want that mix of performance, power, but you need to get decent fuel economy, the 330D and 340D, those are the ones to look out for. Of course, there's a 318D, 320, and is there a 325? I'll make a note. I've not made a note of the 325. So if you had it in your market, I just haven't seen it in my market. That's all. On the petrol side, the fact you get 2-litre engines that are turbocharged makes them appealing, especially because they don't have the fuel penalty of the 6-cylinder engines, but the 6 cylinders across the years in this generation are generally the more robust ones. Okay, so that's the pick. That's the outliers. That's the picks for the F30. Let's go into the latest generation, the G20 and the G21 estate. One car that I forgot to mention on the previous one I touched on there is hybrid. There is a 330e. There's also a active hybrid. Active hybrid, let's put that off to the side. Most people, both the 3 and the 5 series, don't really see the active hybrid as anything. It's got the 6-cylinder engine, but it doesn't really have great fuel advantage. Although our torque across the rev range, the 330e though, which is the plug-in hybrid on the previous model, continues over onto this model. And it's the one that if you have to have a hybrid for any reason, they're quite good picks. Look, people try and race them against sort of B58, M340i's, and of course they can't hold up with that sort of powertrain. But you're comparing, one of the top engines of our time with a hybrid, and that is probably unfair. So that's just a first initial marker on this G series, but also on the previous generation too, just as a sideline, because I'm not going to spend too much time on the hybrids. Now, in this generation, there is a pretty stern drop-off of diesel interest for a variety of reasons. I don't need to go into them, but 2019 for most of you is when you get this car. The M4 on the previous generation carries on into 2020. The M3 for some markets might be able to find a 2020 model on previous gen, but really 2019 is where everything changes. This 3 series comes in and it brings the M car with it, the M3. Okay. Petrols, 318, 320, 330, M340. There's also 320 and a 330. It's a simple lineup. BMW have had to simplify the lineup across different countries, and they've done the same with the diesels. You just now have a very rare 3160, a 318D, a 320D, and a 330D. Okay, or M340D instead. So, but really, that's the 3-litre engine is put in the M340D and the 330D. However, let's not pretend like the M340D is exactly the same. That's quite a big move up from BMW. But the range is fairly simplified compared to previous models, and they're kind of going back to where we were when we first talked about the E21, in that you start to split the range. You've got your efficient models over here, your powerful models over here. M340i, M340D, 330i, 330D. Those are the sort of standouts, but bear in mind, no petrol engine is a 3-litre unless it's an M Lite series. So the M340i, basically. All of them, all the others are now 2 litres, higher efficiency, pretty powerful. I drove the 320i a couple of years back, and I remember saying at the time, it drove like a previous generation, maybe two previous generations, but the naturally aspirated 3-litre engine. So if you were coming out of an E90 330i and you thought, I really want to replace it, but they're all 2 litres from here, what do I do? Do I jump all the way up to the M340i? You don't have to. You could get into a 320i, that turbocharged engine. Honestly, the B47, it's a great performer, and it feels like because of the low down torque, it feels like the performance that you used to get, a decade before in a 330i. If you want to step up, the 330i then pushes that powertrain to its sort of limit of where it's going to go. On the diesels, same sort of story goes, that you get 2 litres. However, if you go 330D, in most markets, that is still a 6-cylinder engine. So a little bit of difference between the petrols and diesels. Personal opinion, I wouldn't overlook the hybrid. I know everyone will. Everyone say, batteries, blah, blah, blah. And I get that. I do. But if tax is a consideration for you, road fund license is an issue, or there is some restrictions for driving cars around that are not hybrid in cities, the 330e, BMW, I think on the quiet, kind of built a performance hybrid. They were never going to give it enough power to compete with the M340i or the M3s. That would have been ridiculous. They would have cannibalized their own market. But instead, they said, what can we do that rewards those people that are saying, I have to get a hybrid, maybe my work tells me I have to get them, or city restrictions or whatever else, but I want to stick with BMW. What can I find? BMW rewarded those people with the 330 model. And so that would be a standout drive for me. I would drive one, even if I was looking at the other ones. The M340i, though, especially if you can buy a 2019 model, possibly a 2020, those two, along with the previous generations, the Bosch ECUs in them are easily tunable. Okay, you'll notice if you go on a tuning website, so if you want to push the power of your 3 Series, if you go on a tuning website and look for the cost of tuning just the ECU on the 340, the M340, you will find that the price to do the later models is a lot higher. And the reason for that is that at the minute, as far as at the time this video has come out, maybe it would have changed, they're pretty locked down, very hard to access for tuners. The only way I know of it currently is they send the ECU off to Finland. There's a team in Finland. They actually physically open up the ECU, do some adjustments to it, post it back to wherever you are. Then the tuner can work on it and push the power, which they don't have to do on the earlier models, which are accessible to them. That lock may change over time. Tuners may get access to them, but it's something to consider if you're there thinking, I really want an M340i and I want to push the power a little bit. Well, be careful. If you go for a late one, it's going to cost you a lot. But if you do want one, just be prepared to pay it. The M340D, that's that one, is sort of the thinking man's M3, if you like, especially because you can have it in a wagon. It's going to be the one that's going to be able to do 50 miles to the gallon. It's also, what's that? Sorry, I'm not going to remember the conversion off the top of my head to litres, but 100 kilometres. But it's going to be a lot higher on its fuel efficiency than the petrol model. And performance-wise on the road where you're not driving 0 to 60, instead you're doing a lot of like 20 to 70 miles an hour or 40 kilometres to 120 kilometres an hour, the diesel really is the performer. So That is all the generations of 3 Series. I hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, consider subscribing. There'll be more buyer's guides on the channels. Check out the buyer's guides for the 3 Series after this one. There is also lots of videos like this. So if you've enjoyed it, you can check them out next. The dog has just got up. I think he's heard me telling me saying the video's over. Anyway, have a great day, and I shall see you in the next one.